So today's daf, for those who are on and those who are in the recording probably, Kuf Mem Hey, 145. And yesterday we got up to around 6 lines from the bottom of Kuf Mem Daled on the bet. And just a reminder, I know I got it was very confusing. I didn't have a Gemara in front of me, so it always makes it harder. But the discussion in the Mishnah was about this question of shushbinut. I don't know what a good English word is for shushbinut. I don't know if they have one in yours. But basically, it's an arrangement where, there we go. So the parts of the arrangement are very important. We're going to discuss them a lot today. Ken, we just got started, but we are talking about this concept of shushbinut. Do they have an English word in yours, Miriam? That'll.
It's just a groomsman.
Yeah, so groomsmen, but so the concept, the idea, and we're gonna unpack it, as the kids say today, a little bit more. But basically, what happened was, let's say you have two families, and we're gonna call them the family of Ruvain and the family of Shimon, right? And so the family of Ruvain has a kid who gets married. I'll call the kid Levi, and the family of Shimon is a kid who Shimon says to his kid Yehuda, go bring a gift to Levi on his wedding. Right? Now you're a representative, not of yourself, because you're either a minor or you're still supported by your father. You're a representative of the family. And what we're going to see today, we didn't talk about this all yesterday, but what we're going to see today is that the custom was you would go to the wedding in person. So Yehuda would go to Levi's wedding, representing the family of Shimon to the family of Reuven, and would enjoy the wedding and would sit at the feast and would have a party and make it last for many days, 7 days maybe. And at the end of that time, you would leave a gift. Now, the gift might be cash. It's not clear if it's cash or if it's an object, but something of value, okay? And that once that happened, once that kid, let's say Yehuda, did this for Levi, the expectation was that Levi would reciprocate when Yehuda got married, okay? So that's the basic idea. The Mishnah had a case where it said, if Shimon died, and it came to the family, it goes to all the kids, right? So we asked, why didn't it go to Yehuda, who's the one who actually brought the gift over? So one explanation yesterday was that, well, it depends on whether Yehuda brought the gift because he was designated to bring it or because he happened to bring it, right? If Shimon said to his children, he had 5 kids, said, one of you bring a gift to Levi for his wedding, and one of them randomly brought it, that's not that specific kid, it's the whole estate. But if he said, Yehuda, go bring a gift, then it would go back to Yehuda. That was one explanation. The other explanation we had yesterday, at the end of the day, which is where we're going to start today, 7 lines from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 lines or 8 lines from the bottom, is Shmuel. Shmuel says, here we're talking about a Yava. And so basically, Shimon said to his son Yehuda, go bring a gift to Levi. Yehuda brought the gift to Levi, so Levi owes a gift back to Yehuda. But when Levi comes back to bring it to Yehuda, Yehuda has died. And Yehuda's widow is being married off to the next brother. We'll call him, I don't know, what we're up to, Yisachar, right? And so you might have thought that Yisachar should get Yehuda's portion of that shushbinut, because he's marrying his wife, his widow, and he gets everything that his brother had. Says the Shmuel that the Mishnah's chiddush is that you don't. Because since it's not owned by Yehuda when he died, it's future, he's going to get it. So then Yisachar doesn't get it for Yehuda, it goes to all the brothers, and that's the case. It's a Yava. So ask the Gemara, Michlal,
if he died at this, he may have died almost right at the time of the wedding, right?
We'll see. We're going to get there. That's a good question. We're going to get there.
No, that's what Eli Stepansky said. That
Okay,
it's basically
we're not there yet. So he might have already learned tomorrow's daf, but today's daf. But the Gemara doesn't say that yet. Says the Gemara now, Michlal de'irach mishalim. The implication is that the other person still has to pay, meaning that Levi has to come. If Yehuda got married, let's say, right? Yehuda died, right? And his brother Yisachar is marrying his widow. And now, for some reason, Levi has a responsibility to come to the wedding and to pay shushbinut for Yehuda, who's dead. Why does Levi have to do that? Why can't Levi say, I'm sorry, the guy I was responsible to is no longer alive, right? So ask the Gemara today, Michlal de'irach mishalem. It implies that the other person, meaning Levi in my convoluted example, has to pay. But Lema, why can't Levi say, Tanuli shushbini v'samachamo? I'm happy to have a great time with Yehuda, but Yehuda's dead. So why do I have to come and pay anything back The person who I owe a debt to is no longer alive. So why is Levi paying anything in this scenario, right? Milo Tanya. Now, didn't we learn? Now we introduce a whole new concept, and the concept we introduce now is a case where people get married, right? So kiddushin, if you recall, is what we call engagement, right? It was a real marriage, but it wasn't consummated yet. They didn't live together. So a man goes to a woman and he says, I want you to marry me. Remember, to do kiddushin, you have to give a shava pruta, right? But he says, I want to give you $1,000 or $100, whatever. And then for whatever reason, the marriage doesn't end up happening, either because they decide not to get married, so he has to give her a get, or because he dies or she dies. Says the Braita, Makom shenagu lahachzir kiddushin machzirin. A place where the minhag is to give back the kiddushin money from the woman to the man. If the marriage is not consummated, you have to give it back. Makom shenagu lo lahachzir in machzirin. In a place where the minhag is not to give it back, you don't give it back. And Amar of Yosef bar Abba Amar Ukva, the second line from the bottom, Amar Shmuel, lo shanel shemetahi. That's only if the woman dies, right? So the man gave the woman a diamond ring worth $10,000. She died before the wedding was consummated. So then there's a question, does her family have to give back that ring? Aval mate who, if the groom died, then for sure she doesn't have to give it back. In machzirin, she doesn't have to give it back because my taima, yichola he shetei because she can say, now the top words of Kuf Mem Hey, it's not my fault that the marriage didn't get consummated. I'm here, I'm ready to get married. It happens to be this guy's dead, right? But tenuli bali v'samachimo. Bring my husband here and I'll consummate the marriage. It's not my fault that this marriage is not going to be consummated. So here too, achanami. So the same principle should apply by the shushbinut. Let Levi say, I'm not giving a gift to the widow of Yehuda. I want to give a gift to Yehuda, right? Tenuli shushbini v'samachimo. Where's Yehuda that I should be misamer with him? So why in the world is Levi giving any gift to Yehuda if we're talking about a case where Yehuda died and it's his yavam? So Amar of Yosef, which is what you heard yesterday, or maybe heard today, I don't know, Ken, is what says the Gemara's answer. And the case here is that Yehuda got married to his wife. And Levi showed up for the wedding and he partied with him for 7 days. But the minhag was, the custom was to pay at the end, right? So you would party for 7 days, and then on your way out, you would leave a check for $1,000 or whatever it might be, right? But that didn't happen. Lo he speak lifro ad shemet. He wasn't able to pay him until he died. Okay, so now Yehuda's dead. Levi has enjoyed his presence for a week, and Levi wants to leave his shushbinut because he really should leave it. So the question then is, who does it go to? Does it go to Yehuda's widow's new husband, which is his brother Yisachar, because as a Yavam, you get everything? Or do we say Yavam only gets that which is in fact, but this is called Ra'ui, not Muchzak, and therefore the Yavam doesn't get it, and it goes La'emtza, and it goes to all the brothers to split equally. So that is the complicated case of our Mishnah. Now, 4 lines from the top. Says the Gemara, let's go back to this case about a woman who gets engaged. Does she have to give back the engagement gifts? Maybe that's in fact a machloket tanaim. Whether if a woman who gets engaged, she gets a diamond ring, let's say, and then her husband dies before the chuppah, can the family say, give it back to us, right? So we just said that everybody agrees that you can't, because she can say, I'm ready to get married. It's not my fault that the marriage can't happen. Maybe that's a machloket tanaim, the Tanya, because we have the following Braita, which is very confusing, and this might be how we understand it. Says the Braita 6 lines from the top. Or 5 lines from the top. Hama'aresa to Isha. A man gets engaged, remember Erusin, Kiddushin is the same word, to a woman. If she's a Betula, and then we assume something happens, right? Then the marriage falls apart. We'll see why in a second. So if she's a Betula, Gova Matayim. Remember, that's the standard Ketubah of a Betula, as we learn in Masechet Ketubot, 200 zuz. Almana, mana. If she's an Almana, then she gets 100. Now continues the Braita. Makam shenagu lahachzir Kiddushin. In a place where the minhag was to return the money that was given for the kiddushin, right? There's a little bit of a debate about what that means, but let's assume, remember, like I said, for kiddushin, you really only technically have to give a pruta. Let's say you gave a diamond ring, which is worth $10,000, right? So in a place where the minhag is to give back the kiddushin, then machzirin, you have to give it back. Makom shenago shelo lahachzir kiddushin in machzirin. Okay, that's what we said before. Divrei Rabbi Natan. Continues the Braita. This is the important words. I mean, it's all important, but this is the critical part. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Omer, Says Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, be'emet amru, in truth they said, which means this is the halacha, makom shenagu lahachzir machzirin, makom shenagu lahachzir in machzirin. Depends on the minhag, which sounds exactly the same thing as Rabbi Natan said, right? So ask the Gemara in the last narrow line, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, hainu Tanakama. Yehuda Nasi just repeated what the Tanakama said, that depends on the minhag of the place. Ella, it must be that in fact the nuance of what they're arguing about depends on whether she died or whether he died, right? Meaning, whose fault was it? Ella, it must be, the first wide line, lav, it must be that tnu li ba'ali ve'esamachi mo'ika beinayu. The difference between them is in a case where she says, look, he died. I'm ready to go get married. He's just not alive. So therefore, in that case, it's not dependent on the minhag hamakom, according to Rabbi Natan. We'll see in a second. It is maybe the fact is that in that case, everyone at Rabbi Natan says no matter what the minhag is, she gets to keep the things, right? She gets to keep the gifts because she's ready to get married. And according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it depends on the minhag. So let's read that inside. In fact, there's words missing from this braita, and this is how you have to read the braita. Hamaresa to isha betula. Person who gets engaged to a woman who's a betula, govem matayim. And if she's an almana, mana. Bimed dvarim emur, and we're adding all these words now. When is that true? Dahadar be ihu. That is where he says, I don't want this to go ahead, right? So I want to sort of cancel this marriage, right? So then he basically has to give her the get, right? So now the Rashbam explains, you give a get, there's a machloket we had in Masechet Ketubot, whether you have to pay your ketubah if it's from Erisin or only from Nisuin, and the Rashbam says this must be going according to the opinion that you have to pay it even from Erisin, of course, right? But that is only in a case where he said, I don't want this to happen, right? So we're Hadr Beit Ihu, he was Choser. Aval Meita, continues the Braita, and we're adding in all these words. If she died, and so the reason that they don't have any suin is not because the husband said, I'm not interested, it's because she's not alive anymore. So then the question is, obviously she doesn't get a ketubah. When a woman dies, she doesn't get a ketubah, right? But does her family have to give back the diamond ring? So there it depends on the minhag hamakom. Aval Meita, then makom shenagu lahachzir, in a place where the minhag is to give it back machzirin. Makom shenagu lachzir in machzirin. However, dafka shemeta hi. But that's only if she died, and that's why they can't get married. Aval meitu, if the husband died, or the groom, we'll call him, died, then everybody agrees in machzirin. You don't have to give back the diamond ring. My taima. This is Rabbi Natan speaking. My taima, because Yechola he shetei amer, because the woman can say, I'm ready to get married. Tenuli ma'at bali v'samachimo, right? So that's what Rabbi Natan says, basically, is that if the wedding is called off, then he has to pay back the ketubah and he has to let her leave her kedushin. If she dies, if someone dies, then it depends. If she dies, then it depends on the minhag hamakom, right? Whether the minhag is to give it back or not give it back. But if he dies, then she definitely doesn't have to pay it back, no matter what the minhag is. That's the Tanakam Rabbi Natan. V'ata Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi lemeimar. Now Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi in the fifth wide line, comes to say, be'emet amru, that in fact I disagree. And bein meitu, bein meita he. Whether he died or she died, it still depends on minhag hamakom. Makom shenagu lahachzir machzirin, makom shenagu shelo lahachzir in machzirin. It depends on the custom. V'lo matzi amra, she cannot say, look, I'm sure we're in a country where the minhag is to give back the gifts, but I'm ready to get married. Atenu li bali v'samachimo. So that seems to be the argument between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Natan. Whether a woman who is alive and her husband, her betrothed, is dead, can say, I don't care what the minhag hamakom is. I get to keep this diamond ring because I'm ready to go ahead with the marriage. Says Gemara lo. In fact, that's wrong. That meaning, Dikuli alma, everybody is of the opinion. All Tanaim are of the opinion that Yechola sheto amar tenuli bali v'samachimo. That a woman can say, I am ready to finish the marriage. You can't take this diamond ring back from me because I'm ready to get married. Again, I'm using diamond ring because that's what we use, but it could be any gift, right? Udemithu, when the betrothed, when the groom died, kuli amalo pligi, everybody would not argue, meaning there'd be no argument about what the halacha is. The halacha would be that she keeps the gifts. Ki pligi, when does Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi argue? Shemeta hi. It's where she died. right? And the question of when she died, hacha b'kiddushin l'tivuin nitznu kamiflagi. The question here is whether kiddushin is given. Tivuin literally means to be sunk, meaning is it considered to be a sunk cost when you have kiddushin? Meaning, we'll read that what that means in a second. Excuse me. It's whether when she dies, you consider the cost that a husband gave for marrying her to be sunk, right? Meaning, Rabbi Natan Savar, Rabbi Natan holds Kiddushin lavli tibuin nitznu. Rabbi Natan holds that Kiddushin is not considered to be sunk, and therefore, if she dies and the marriage doesn't happen, it depends on the minhag hamakom, right? It depends on the custom of the place. If the place says yes, then you give it back. If the place says no, then you whatever, you don't give it back. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi comes to say, I disagree. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, you know what? Kiddushin l'tibuin nitznu. The kiddushin is sunk. When you go to a woman, you say, I want to marry you, and here's a gift. Even if she drops dead the next day, that money is out of your hands completely. Says Gemara, well, that's a very nice explanation, but it's not what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said. Because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi also said it depends on the minhag hamakom, right? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi also said, continues the Gemara, where am I? Hamakom shenagu lachzir machzirin katani. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said in a place where the minhag is to give the money back, you give the money back. But you just told me Rabbi Yehuda Nasi holds that once you get married, it's sunk in. You never get it back.
Are we just talking about gifts, or are we talking about like the whole and like the caterer and all of that?
None of I don't think the whole indicator. We're talking about kiddushin. So when a man goes to a woman and says, "I'd like to marry you," right? He has to give her something of value to marry her.
So we're only talking about that, whatever it is
Right.
that affected the
Right.
kiddushin. Okay.
And what we're assuming is, I'm adding this detail the Rishonim added, that it's talking about what's above the pruta. Let's say, he can give her a small amount. He gives her a diamond ring, right? Which is many people do nowadays, right? So again, not everyone, but they often do it. So if the diamond ring is the kiddushin, he gave her $10,000, but he could have given her $5, right? So what about that extra money? But now, so the Gemara is about to add complications for what your point, Miriam, which is what Reb Yehuda Nasi is talking about. Hachi kamar savlanut vaday makom shenagul hachzir machzirin. Says Reb Yehuda Nasi, look, the gifts that you give for kiddushin, I think that they are sunk, meaning no matter what happens subsequent to that, the woman gets to keep them, even if she drops dead. But there's another category of gifts called savlanut. And savlanut are the gifts that are not given at the time of kiddushin, but the gifts that are given after kiddushin, right? Meaning for that year or whatever time they have between kiddushin and nisuin, the husband or the groom would send gifts over to her, maybe a watch or a cloth. I don't think they sent watches, right? Cloth and food and things like that for the house. Those are called savlanut, and those are not guaranteed. Those depend on the minhag hamakom. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is saying the kiddushin money is guaranteed, but the extra stuff, the savlanut that you send, depends on minhag hamakom. And continues the Gemara, we're around halfway through the page. Hani Tanai, Hani Tanai. In fact, these Tanaim are just like the following Tanaim. The Tanya, there's
interesting that Rabbi Stepansky points out that it's Rabbi Natan was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So therefore, it is a close student of his. And so here it says, Rabbi Natan, in many places in Shas, he said that sometimes it just says Rabbi Yehuda. But every place where Rabbi Natan appears with Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara Dafka says Rabbi Yehuda Nasi to indicate that that's the Rabbi Yehuda, that he's his teacher, so that it's very clear that we know that this is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi rather than another Rabbi Yehuda.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Very often we don't call him Rabbi Natan either. We call him Natan Abavli, but that's a whole nother point. But continues the Gemara, V'hani Tnai Kehani Tnai. These Tanaim hold like the following Tanaim. The Tanya, Kadsha Kikar, right? A person does Kiddushin with a Kikar. Now, Kikar, the Rashbam here actually says it's 25 mana, but elsewhere the Gemara says it's 60 mana, I believe, right? So a lot of money, right? A ketubah, remember, is 1 mana, right? 100. So, but this is, you're giving, $10,000, let's say, a huge amount of money for kiddushin. So your kadsha b'kikar, a very, very large sum of money. That's your kiddushin, okay? And then something happens. Now, we don't exactly know what happens, but something then happens, okay?
2,500 zoos.
which is a lot of money. That's what the Rashbam says. But the Rashash, actually, the Rashash says that the Rashbam is mistaken. It's a ta'ut sofer. That doesn't really mean that, but that is what he says. And the Rashash says that it should say it's a mistake. He says in the Rashbam, and it should say 60 mana, so 60,000, right? Anyways, it's a lot of money. Okay, so 6,000, not 60,000, 6,000, not 2,500, but 6,000. Anyways, he gives the woman he does kiddushin with a huge amount of silver, right? Of kikar, a kikar. But something then happens. We'll see exactly in a second what happens. Says the Braita, Betula govem matayim. If she's a betula, if she's a virgin, right, at the wedding, that's matayim, that's the ketubah. Amana mana. If she's an amana, she gets 100. Okay, now sounds like it's in addition to her ketubah, to her gift of kiddushin. So she got 2,500 with kiddushin. She gets an additional 200 if she's a betula. That's her ketubah, or additional 100 if she's an almana. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says no. If she's a betula, govem matayim. If she's a betula, she gets the 200, and if she's an almana, she gets 100, and she has to return the other 2,500 or 6,000, whatever the number might be. Umachzeret lo et hashar. She's got to return everything else from her kiddushin. Now, again, we're going to see the case in a second, but it must be a case where she is blamed for ending this marriage between kiddushin and nisuin, and she's got to pay it all back. Rabbi Yossi says, I have a whole different opinion, that kidsha be'esrim, if he was mekadesh her with 20, now 20 here means 20 shekel, which is 80 mana. Remember, shekel is 80 zuz. A shekel is 4 zuz. So if he gave her 20, then she gets back 30 chatzaim, 15 basically, 30 halves, which is 15. Kitcha b'shloshim, if he gave her 30, then notein la esrim chatzaim. You got to give her back 20 halves. We'll see the math in a second, why that is. Now, but that's the Braita. B'mayaskina, now what are we talking about? So ilema shemeta, that she died. If she died, then she might get to keep all the money of kiddushin, but she doesn't get a ketubah, right? Miyatli ketubah. You don't get a ketubah if you die. Ketubah is if the husband dies or divorces her. Ella must be shemetu, right? It must be that the husband died. Now, if the husband died, why would she have to give back the money of the kiddushin? Why can't she say, I'm ready to get married, right? Why does she have to, according to Rabbi Yehuda, why does she have to return the extra? Neima, why can't she say, Tenuli bali v'esamachimo, I'm ready to get married? Ella, it must be the case is where he had to divorce her because he was forced to divorce her. It's be'eshet Yisrael shezinta. She is married to a Yisrael and she has an affair, right, between kiddushin and nisuin. Says, well, if she has an affair, the no, zinta doesn't mean an affair. Zinta means she slept with someone. So who'd she sleep with? So if she did it willingly, then she doesn't get a ketubah. Then what are you talking about? Miyatale ketubah, right? She loses her ketubah. Ella be'onis. It's talking about a case where she was raped, right? She was forced to sleep with someone. So then it says, well, if she was forced, then why does he have to divorce her at all? She's Mishra Shari, right? Yisrael is allowed to stay with a woman if she wasn't done willingly. Ella, it must be Be'eshet Kohen. The case must be where a Kohen married a woman and she was then raped. She was then forcibly shenensa, right? She was raped between the Kiddushin and the Nisuin. And he has to divorce her. He doesn't have a choice. But the question is, does she get to keep the money from the kiddushin? It wasn't her fault, but it wasn't his fault, right? So b'kiddushin l'tivu in nitznu kamiflagi. The question is the money from the kiddushin sunk? Rabbi Meir saw kiddushin l'tivu in nitznu, that everything that he gave her for kiddushin, she keeps, even though it's not his fault that he's got to divorce her, right? So she gets to keep it. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, no, not necessarily. It depends on whose fault it is. It's not his fault here. He gets a refund, basically. Lav l'tivu in nitznu. And Rabbi Yossi is misapka. Rabbi Yossi is in doubt. He's unsure. Rabbi Yossi says, I'm not sure, and therefore basically you split it. Hilkach, kadsha be'esrim, right? If the husband gave her 20 kesef, which is 80 zuz, right? It's 4 zuz to a shekel, basically. He gave her 20, where am I? Kadsha with esrim, right? So just to do the math, he gave her 20 shekel. So she has 80 zuz. So now he has to divorce her because she was raped and she's an Eshet Kohen. But he basically, if she's a betula, right? I'm sorry, the case, let's just say, is that he's going to give her 100, right? Because she's not a betula. So she's going to give her 100 for her ketubah. But he initially, 100 is 100 zuz, which is basically 25 shekel. So he initially gave her 20, right? Of the 20, we say we don't know who gets to keep it, so we split it. So basically, she gets 10 and he gets 10. Okay. So now the 10 that he gets is equals 40 zuz. So he still owes her an extra 60 zuz, basically. So notein la shloshim chatzaim, he has to give her 15 more, 30 halves, which is 15 times 4 is 60 to make up to 100. But if he was kidsha b'shloshim, if he initially gave her 30 for her kiddushin, she gets to keep 15 because of safek. He should get 15 back. 15 times 4 is 60. And so he has to give her an additional, notein la esrim chatzim, an additional 10 or 20 halves, which is 10 times 40 equals another 40 zuz. And so basically, he's got to make it equal 100, and she gets to keep half of it, and the other half is his. Amar Rav Yosef Bar Menyumi, Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef Bar Menyumi said in the name of Rav Nachman, "B'kol makom shenagu lachzir machzirim." Any place where the minhag is to give it back, you have to give it back. Now, what in the world is he talking about? Tergamu, they explained that what he was talking about was naharda. That when he said kol makom, he meant in any place, meaning that is the minhag in naharda. So in naharda, the minhag was that you would have to give back the money from the kiddushin. Ask him, okay, naharda is very helpful, but what about the rest of Bavel? Shar Bavel Mai, what about the rest of Bavel? So Rabbi Rav Yosef Damri Travayo, Rabbi Rav Yosef said, Muhari Hadri, that the mohar, which is similar to what we talked before about the savlanut, according to one explanation in the Rashbam, that you have to give back. The extra gifts that were given, you have to give back. But kiddushay lo hadri, that the money for the kiddushin, you don't have to give back. Amar of Papa, and Siddur of Papa, the halacha is Bein shemetu, whether he dies, bein shemeta he, whether she dies, or hadr behu, or he decides he doesn't want it anymore. In all of those cases, they had kiddushin, they didn't have nisuin, muhari hadri. The gifts have to go back to the husband's family if he's dead, right, or to him. But kiddushe lo hadre. But the kiddushin does not go back. But if hadr be'ihi, if she is the one who said, I no longer want to get married, right? Now she can't force that, but she can say it. Then afilu kiddushi nami hadri, then she has to give back everything. So if it was her choice, not her death, but her choice, then she's got to give back everything she got for this marriage. Amemar says, I disagree. No matter what, kiddushe lo hadre, you never give back the money that he gave her to marry her, even if it's her choice not to get married. You know why? Because we're worried, not because she shouldn't keep it, but because we're worried that if you collect that money, people will say, wait a second, they were never married. They might think there was never a kiddushin, which is wrong. There is a kiddushin. He's got to give her a get, right? But you might think that if you take back the money, give back the diamond ring, that they were never married. And then you might think he's allowed to marry her sister, which he's not allowed to. And so it's a gezerah, basically. We don't want to undo this marriage because we're afraid that it's going to lead to prohibited relationships. Let me read that inside. Amemar says, 4 lines from the bottom, Kiddushin lehadre, you never give back the money from the Kiddushin because gezerah shema yomru Kiddushin tovsin ba'achuta. People might think that this man, Ruvain, married Leah, let's say, and then Leah said, I don't want to be married to you. So Ruvain gives her a get. But you might think that if Leah gives back the ring or is made to give back the ring, that they were never married. And that Reuven can now come and marry Leah's sister Rachel, right? And he's not allowed to because they were married. And therefore, you never take back the money for the kiddushin. Rav Ashi says that's ridiculous because he gave her a get, right? Get gita mochiach. The get is mochiach. Everyone knows he gave her a get. So of course they were married and he divorced her. Says Gemara, but that's a mistake. Other Rav Ashi badutahi. What Rav Ashi said is wrong because the ika the shama baha v'lo shama baha. Right, you always have a concern that people heard about the wedding, but they didn't hear about the get and they don't know about it. And so we're afraid that if you seem like you're undoing the marriage, that people will come to make a mistake and think they were never married. And therefore you never, according to Amemar, and I think this is how we seem to paskin, you never give back and undo the gift that led to the marriage. Continues the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom. Shashushpinut nigbeit bebeitin. This is what our Mishnah said, that this responsibility of shushpinut is a legal responsibility and it can be collected in beitin. Tana Rabbanan, the Braita says, Chamisha dvarim nemru b'shushpinut. There are 5 facts, 5 details that we said about shushpinut. First of all, nigbeit bebeitin, which our Mishnah said, it can be collected in beitin, meaning if the person doesn't pay you back, you can go to court and say, Levi owes me money because I went to his wedding and paid him money. He's got to come to my wedding and pay me money. V'chozeret b'onata. Now you pay it back in its proper time, meaning Yehuda can't go to Levi and say, I'm really short on money. I'm not married yet, but can you front me the money you're going to give me at my marriage, right? It's not owed until Yehuda gets married. And Ein Ba Mishum Ribit, interestingly, it's not, there's no rebit, meaning, although it's a debt that Levi has to Yehuda in the case we talked about, Yehuda, if Levi gives Yehuda more than Yehuda gave Levi, it's not considered to be rebit, right? Because it's not an exact debt, it's a gift, basically, of a certain amount. Ve'ena shviat mishametet, right? Unlike many other debts, Shemitah doesn't make it go away. So if Shemitah passes between the weddings of Levi and Yehuda, he's still got to pay it back. And the fifth thing is, we had in our Mishnah, if it falls to the Yerusha, the Bechor does not get a double portion because remember, you only get a double portion of what's muhsak, not what's ra'oi kiba muhsak. This is an owed debt, but it's not going to happen in real time. Now let's analyze each of these things. Second line on Daf Kuf Mem Hey Amud Bet. Nig Beit Beit Din. First of all, it's collected in Beit Din, meaning you can go to court and collect it. My time is Kimil V'Damya. It's like a loan, essentially. Once Yehuda showed up at Shimon at Levi's wedding and was misamech him and gave him gifts, Levi owes that back. It's a loan. The aim mishum ribit, but it's not ribit because it's not a fixed loan. You don't give it on condition that you give back something more. It's basically, I'll give you a nice gift, you give me a nice gift. We're not being makbid on the amount or the sum that's being given back. And ena shviat mishamta, it doesn't go away on Shemitah. Lo karina be lo yigos. Remember the pasuk about Shemitah says you can't, yigos literally means exact. You don't collect the exact amount, meaning because the Rashbam explains actually from a Gemara in Makot, which I guess we'll get to soon enough in a few months, that when you have a loan that's not due at the time of Shemitah, Shemitah is not mishametet. Meaning if I lend you money for 10 years, right, and you pay me back in 10 years and Shemitah happens in between, Shemitah does not get rid of that loan. So this is the same thing. You didn't really owe it back until the time that Yehuda got married. So at Shemitah, basically, it was not owed at that time, and therefore Shemitah cannot get rid of it. And further, we said the fifth halacha actually, was Eina Bechar Noto B'Pishnayim. The Bechar does not get a double portion in it, even though it goes to the estate, the Havile Ra'oi, because it's a debt that's owed to the estate. Ve'ena Bechar Notel, but Ra'oi Kiba Muchsak, the Bechar does not get double in that which is owed, like something that is actually muhzak in the possession of the state. Now says Rav Kahana.
One Shemitah, let's say the person gets married in 25 years, 30 years later. And so this Shemitah does not cancel. But what about the next Shemitah, the next one?
No Shemitah cancels because the debt's not due at that time, meaning Shemitah cancels debts that are due now, but a debt that's not due until the future, Shemitah is not mishamet. That's how the Rashbam explains it.
Right, but it says if it's in a regular loan, it's not this one, but if Shemitah will not, if you say the loan is for 10 years, it won't cancel, but by the next Shemitah, it will cancel it, right? Because if you say,
only if it was, the 10 years are up, but I'm saying here it's not 10 years, it's till I get married. So the time of the loan is not till the
but the comparison to say we got a 10-year loan, if it's a 10, so you bring up as an example, but at 10 years, okay, so, but the next Shemitah, that would be canceled.
Right, but if it's a 20-year loan, then it won't be. So that's the point, is that this is not it's a loan that's not due until the time the person gets married. So any Shemitah in between cannot cancel it. Amar Rav Kahana, we are 7 lines from the top. Says Rav Kahana, Klala de Shushbanita. Here are sort of the rules of Shushbanita. These are very important rules. Again, we don't do this, but they clearly dealt with it very, very severely. Havi b'mata, right? If again, the case we have, Yehuda brought a gift to Levi when Levi got married. Levi now owes Yehuda. If Levi is in town, Havi b'mata means he's in town when Yehuda gets married, you got to come to the wedding, bring the gifts, do the whole thing. If you don't do it, you can go to court and complain. Shama kol tavla, even if he's not in town, but he hears the sound of tavla, of the bells running, right? Meaning they're announcing there's a wedding, then you're supposed to ask whose wedding is it, right? They used to ring the bells or something, right? That it was officially a wedding. He says here, tavla is actually a drum, right? You bang on it, but you would make some noise. You've got to ask questions. You got to know who it is. You got to come.
So let's assume that he's a businessman and he actually goes on a business trip. Does he have to designate an agent beforehand to take his place in the event he's not going to be around when
that's a
he
good
gets
question.
married?
I'm not sure to what extent he's responsible. Let's read the next case because that's sort of your case, which is lo shama kol tabla, right? The person Levi who owes it to Yehuda didn't hear the kol tabla, right? He didn't hear the sound of this drum. So he doesn't know, or as you put it, right? He went on a business trip and he had no way of knowing. And this is the important thing, right? He didn't get an invitation in the mail, right? So iboy leilo day. Well, it's Yehuda's responsibility to tell Levi that he's going to get married. And if he doesn't tell him, how can he be a shushbin if he didn't know about it? Says the Gemara, but however, taromet itlay. So Levi could be angry with Yehuda, right? Tarom means he has a grievance with him, but he still has to pay. Still shalumi mishalim, even though he didn't come to the wedding because he didn't know about the wedding. Yehuda's great friend didn't even tell him he was getting married, but Levi has a debt to pay for some part of the wedding. Ask the Gemara, well, so but you don't have to pay the whole thing. You didn't go to the wedding, right? So we understand that some of your payment is because you went to the wedding and you had a good time. Here, you didn't even go to the wedding. So ad kama, how much, the Gemara's question is, how much do you deduct from what you would have paid because you didn't go to the wedding, because you weren't invited to the wedding, right? Meaning, if you didn't go because you didn't feel like going, you can't deduct anything. But this case, you didn't know about the wedding. No one told you about it. You were out of town, right? And you didn't hear the bells. So you didn't go. You still have to pay. But how much can you deduct because you didn't go? So Amar Abaya, Abaya said, listen, it really depends on how much they basically were, how much, so says Abaya, let me explain it. Nogu b'nei Genana, the b'nei Genana were, which means the people part of the wedding, right? The wedding party had the following custom. Ad Zuza, right? Now, if the amount that you were going to give, and this is probably based on, there were like classes of gifts, right? And we always have this. You can give a low-level gift, a medium-level gift. So if your gift was up to the category of a zuz, right, then we say that you really don't have to give anything. Because then, atye bekape achle bekrese. The Rashbam is not clear if we have this gear, so he says he likes it. Some people have it, some don't. But basically, you would come, atye bekape means you come with your hands open up, and you would eat what was going into your stomach, meaning the cost of a meal is around the zuz, right? And so, therefore, since you didn't get to eat the meal, you basically don't have to pay anything, because that was your shushbinut, was the zuz that you were going to eat for 7 days. You didn't come, you don't have to pay anything. But if it's so that's a meal is like a zuz. But ad arba, if let's say your category of shushbinut is that you paid, meaning because Levi paid for you, you paid for Levi, up to 4 zuz, so that's a much larger amount, then the fact that you missed the meal means that you have to pay half, mishalim palga. So Rashbam explains, right, that obviously they would have given you a better meal, right, because you're paying a higher shushbinut, you would have gotten the prime rib, right, when you went up for the wedding. So you therefore assume that the meal that you missed was worth 2 zuz, until you pay the other 2 zuz. But mikan ve'elech, let's say your shushbinut is much higher. Let's say, you're 100 zuz kind of category. Then it depends, inish ki chashivute. It depends on each person based on how chashuv they are, meaning how much they would have spent on you at that wedding. And so had they spent, they would have given you the fanciest whiskey and the best meats and everything really good, and it would have been 10 zuz worth, then you've got to pay 90, let's say, right? So it always depends on the person and their chashivut. So it's obviously complicated, but that's what it depends on. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, in fact, there's another bright, and this is a Tosefta here, which is asu imi bepumbi, right? Let's say one person, Levi, Yehuda was a shushbin for Levi in pumbi, meaning in public, right? And now, bikesh lasut lo bimo betzina. But now when it's time to pay it back, he says, I don't want to make a big party for you like you made for me. It's tough times. I want to make a cheap party, right? Or I want to do a private party, which is much smaller to him, right? Sorry, it's not that. It's that Yehuda supported Levi when Levi made this big fancy wedding in the Ritz, right? Yehuda now comes to make a small wedding. It's a tough time. He doesn't want to be very mefarseim. Levi could come and say, I don't want to be your shushbin because I'm not reciprocating to you the way you gave to me. Meaning, Yachol Lomarlo, Levi can say to Shimon, look, bipumbi esa imcha, right? You did it for me with the whole, I want to do for you in pumbi, in public, just like you did it for me. So meaning, I don't owe you shushbinot for this kind of wedding. One day when you get married in a big wedding, I'll give you shushbinot for that. Or, continues the Braita, asa imo betula, right? If Yehuda did it for Shimon to Levi, when he married a Betula, and now he's getting married to an Almanah, Bikesh lasot l'ba'almanah, Yechol Lomar, he could say the same thing. Betula aseh imcha k'derech shasitei mi. Look, I'm going to support you at your wedding when it's similar to my wedding. Or asayimo b'shniya, the same idea, right? Let's say Yehuda supported Levi for his wedding when he was getting a second marriage. It was his second wife, right? And now Yehuda's got his first marriage. Bikesh lasot imo berishona. Again, yochal lomar lo, he can say to him, the kishet tisa isha acheret. Look, I'm not supporting you in your first marriage. You supported me in my second marriage. When you get to your second marriage, your second wife, then I'm going to support you. So, meaning it's reciprocal. It's basically the idea. Or it continues, one more case. Asayimo ba'achat. Let's say Yehuda supported Levi when he got married one woman. Bikesh lasot imo b'shtayim. Now he's getting married to two women. Yechol nomar, he could say the same thing. Ba'achat aseh imcha k'derech shasiti imi. I'm going to do for you exactly what you did for me. Okay. Continues the Braita on a side note. Tanura Banan, we are around 12 lines from the bottom, maybe 15 lines from the bottom. This is a different topic, but you'll see why it's connected in a second. Tanura Banan said the Braita. This is a little bit of Agarita. Okay. Says the Braita, Atir Nichsin. A person who is, Atir means rich in Aramaic, right? A person who is rich in neches, in property. Atir Pumbi, he's rich in public, meaning everybody knows he's rich. You know what that is like? Zehu Bal Hagadot. That's like a person who is a big magid, right? He can tell great stories from the Gemara, from the story, from the Tanakh. Rashbam says everywhere he goes, people want to hear from him, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a wedding or it's a Beit Midrash or it's a shul or he's got something to say everywhere because he's just telling stories, right? So that's a person who's rich in public. If you're Atir Slaim, if you're very rich in coins, Atir Tekoa, you're very rich in real estate. The Rashbam, that's one explanation of the Rashbam. Zeu Bal Pilpol, that's a person who can be mifalpel. They can darshan, they can derive new things from the words that are there. Rashbam explains it's like having coins. You always have more coins, right? So he's, no matter what, the guy's got more and more things to say because he can always find new limudim in the Mishnayot and the Gemara that he knows. If you're Atir Meshach, Atir Kemas, if you're someone who is rich in meshach means oil, right? What you smear yourself with, or you're atir kemas. Now, kemas is also not so clear what it means. One explanation in the Rashbam, I believe, is that things that are hidden, right? That are like private. So that is zehu bal shmuot. That is a person who knows things that are he knows many halachot, meaning he memorized many rules. He can state anything over time because he really knows the facts, right? So he can always come up with something that would help people know what they're talking about. But however, continues the Braita, hakol tzrichin l'marechitya. Everybody needs the one who's got the grain, right? The grain is the basis of all the food that you make. You can have all the money and all the oil and all the other stuff. You need to have the grain, and that is the one who knows Talmud. That's the one who knows the Gemara because basically they've got the building blocks, the fundamentals for teaching everything else. So you might not know how to be mifalpel, you might not know how to speak well, but if you know the Gemara and you know the details, that's the person who's the marichita. That's the equivalent to owning the grain. Amar Rabbi Zeir, Amar Rav, my dichtiv, it's a similar, again, we're going to go on these agaritas. It says in the pasuk in Mishlei, Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im, right? All the days of the poor are evil, are bad, right? To be poor is terrible all the time. That's referring to Zebal Talmud. That's referring to one who knows the Talmud. Because if you know the Talmud, it's so difficult. You never get an answer. You just keep learning and learning and learning. It's like being Ra all the time. But continues the pasuk in Mishlei, Tov Lev Mishtet Tamid. The one who's got Tov Lev, he's always having a party all day long. Zebal Mishnah. That's one who knows Mishnah because you always know the Mishnayot. You know them by heart. It's nothing complicated. Rashbam says Mishnah is really easy. You always know the answer. But Rava said it's the opposite, right? Rava said Ibcha. It's exactly the opposite because the one who knows the Mishnah, you're limited to your Mishnah. You can't really figure out what's going on. And if there's a contradiction in the Mishnah, you have no way to resolve it. But if you know the Gemara, you know how to resolve all the contradictions. That is Amar of Risharshia made the Rava, and in fact, of Risharshia, the son of Rava, or not the son, in name of Rava, said, "My dichtiv." What does it mean in the pasuk in Kohelet, where it says, "Mesia avanim ye'atsev bahem"? The one who breaks stones, who quarries stones, is ya'atsev. Now, ya'atsev, he understands it literally means atsev, right? You become saddened, you become hurt by them. Bokea eitzim, the one who chops wood, yisachambam. You'll become sachan, which he understands mean like it says by in the beginning of Melachim, right? That she was a sochenet for David. She warmed him up, right? The women would come to warm up David. So the one who breaks stones gets depressed by it, gets hurt by it. The one who breaks wood gets warmed up. What's that referring to? Nesia avanim yatzev bahem, that's Elu Bali Mishnah. That's the ones who are the Mishnah, because it's like stones, because you don't know how to manipulate it, you don't understand it, you just know these Mishnayot, but if they don't make sense, you can't do anything with it, and you get hurt all the time. But Bokea Eitzim Yisachein Bam, the one who cuts wood, it chops wood, gets warmed by it, Elu Bali Talmud. Those are the Bali Talmud, because their effort of learning the Gemara leads to good results, meaning to answers. So clearly there was a debate, as you could tell, between which is more important, the Mishnah or the Talmud. Rabbi Chanina Amar, we're at the last narrow line. I think we'll finish the daf very successfully. Rabbi Chanina says, there's another pasuk in, we just quoted the pasuk in Kohelet. It says, Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im. What does that mean? All the days of the Ani are evil, are bad? Zesh Yesh L'Isha Ra'ah. That's a person who's in a bad marriage. Every day is tough. V'tov Lev, Mishtet Tamid, Zesh Yesh L'Isha Tova. One who has a good marriage, a good wife, is every day is a good day. Rabbi Yanai says, you know how I understand these psukim? The second wide line, Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im Ze Istinis. Right, that's a person who is very, I don't know how we translate istinis. It's like someone who's very sensitive, very makbid on things. You have a translation?
Squeamish.
Yeah, scream. So meaning that person, no matter what, they're going to find problems, right? It's dirty, it's clean, whatever. Everything's going to be a problem. Tov leiv mishtet tamid, zeh shedato yafeh. This is a person who's got a good attitude, right? When you have a good attitude, everything's okay. Rabbi Yochanan says,
I'm
sorry?
The last line in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Tov Lev Mishta Tamid, and it refers there to Purim Katan. And the Ramah has a whole discussion about that. That's the Ramah brings that.
Very nice. I didn't know
only
that.
two places where the word Tamid is used in all of them. It's the first sentence and the last sentence.
You mean Ashrei Adam
No, the word Tamid.
In the Shulchan Aruch, you mean?
Right. The first very first sentence and the last sentence.
The first one is Ashrei Adam Mefached Tamid. Yeah. Rabbi Yochanan says, we're three lines from the bottom. Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im Ze Rachaman. It's the opposite. You know who's going to have a bad life? Someone who is too kind, because there's always tragedies in the world. You open the newspaper and you're going to be depressed every day, right? If you feel bad for people undergoing tragedies. But Tov Lev Mishtet Tamid Ze Achzari, a cruel person. And Achzari doesn't, we say cruel, but cruel means unfeeling, right? You don't care about what's happening, so you never have a problem. You have no cares in the world. So it's the opposite, right? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, that's someone whose mind is narrow. That's how I like to translate that, tokitzara. Meaning they can't imagine things outside of their own narrow view, and so they're constantly upset. And Tovev Mishtet Tamid, Zeshadat Chava, that's someone who's got a very broad, open-minded, we'll call it. I like that translation. Datorah Chava, that person can always find good in something, can always find a new perspective, and so things look better. Let's go to the Mishnah, right? If we got 5 more minutes in us.
It's really someone who's Rachava is really patient.
You could translate it in many, many ways. There's a lot of different translations here. But
Achsari is, you say, what did you say, cool?
No, Achsari, I said cruel.
Oh, cruel. It sounded like cool. And I thought, wow.
No, cruel. But
because the language in Hebrew today, Achsari means ugly. That's the language of this on the street today. Achsari means like ugly. If you say Achsariot, it means that's
I'm not familiar with that word, but let's continue to the Mishnah.
Modern Hebrew.
Okay. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, top line of Daf Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. Said Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im. What does the pasuk mean? All the days of Ani are evil, are bad. What do you mean? Even if you're poor, Va'ika Shabbatot v'Yamim Tovim. Right? Everybody gets food from the Tamcho. He gets food from charity for Shabbos and Yom Tov. So what do you mean every day is bad? You got to have some good days. Says Gemara, it's true, but even the person who's poor, who gets good days, those are not good days, because it's Shmuel. Damar Shmuel, you know what Shmuel said? Shinoi Vesed, if you change up your normal behavior, Tchilat Choli, that's the beginning of getting sick. So you take a person who's poor and he can't eat any food all week, and you give him a lot of food for Shabbos, it turns out to cause him as much damage as good. So everything is bad for that person. Now, Ketiv b'Sefer ben Sira, we're going to finish to the Mishnah with a enigmatic statement from Sefer ben Sira, which I'm just going to read and translate from my translation, that Kol Yemei Ani Ra'im, right? That's the pasuk in Kohelet. I'm sorry, Mishlei. All the days of an Ani are bad. Ben Sira Amar, Afleilot. It's even the nights. Doesn't mean the days. His nights are pretty bad too. Bishval gagim gago, because at the lowest roof is his roof, meaning everything drops to his roof. Mimitar gagim legago, right? The rain goes down to his roof. Berum harim karmo. His vineyard is at the highest mountain, right? Because he gets the worst property. Me'afar karmo lekramim. And because of that, the soil of his kerem goes down and erodes into other kramim. So basically, he's got the worst of every world because his house is at the lowest point, so all the rain falls on him, right? And it falls into his house, but his property is the cheapest, so it's the highest mountain, and it erodes away, and everyone takes his nourishment and nutrients. So if you're poor, you can't win. That's what Ben Sira says. So we got up to the Mishnah. It was a long daf. Thank you all for being very patient. It's complicated. We're going to continue tomorrow with Savlanut. It's not over yet. Right? Savlanut, remember, is the next category of gifts that you give for weddings, which we said.
The bridal gifts.
Marital gifts, right?
Bridal gifts.
Bridal gifts, correct.
Yeah. I mean,
like we have with Rivka, right? So we'll get to all these cases and continue tomorrow morning, God willing. So Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Have a good week, everyone.
You too, and rest up.
Thank you.